Welcome to Watershed Chats, presented by the Water People podcast in collaboration with Patagonia. Watershed moments are traditionally understood as a division or distinction between two phases. They can be turning points that define our shared history. Here, we sit down with experts and those having a go at building and dreaming new ways into fruition for a healthy and habitable future on planet Ocean. Our podcast comes to you from the coastal land and waters of both the Bundjalung and Kabi Kabi nations. We'd like to acknowledge these traditional custodians and pay respects to elders, past, present, and emerging. We'd also like to extend that respect to all First Nations people this podcast ripples out toward. Heath Joske is a freesurfer committed to regenerating his homelands. In one of the driest parts of the driest continent on Earth, he's committed to rehabilitating his large coastal acreage that was stripped bare by industrial agriculture. Between riding some of Australia's most revered and underground waves and raising a young family, Heath is employing the principles of permaculture to bring balance back to his local coastal ecology.
Lauren, I wanted to ask you what it is you know about Heath Joske. How did you first hear of Heathy and some of the stuff he gets up to?
I remember hearing something about an incredible wave at J-Bay, and I know he is basically fearless in the ocean, charges big Australian balmy waves, and what else do I know? You're a fisherman, and I also know that you played a huge part in the Fight for the Bite campaign here in Australia and internationally, that you went to Norway and spoke to the big oil company Equinor to let them know that Australians, specifically surfers and fisher folk like yourself in your community and around Australia, were and continue to be opposed to oil exploration in the Great Australian Bight Marine Park. And what else do I know? You worked with Extinction Rebellion activists while you were in Norway. That's pretty cool.
And that he's an owner of a really amazing beard.
Hair farmer.
Really amazing.
Full-on hair farmer. I got to see that for myself a couple of months ago before COVID set in. We got to visit your place and meet your beautiful family and see how you're getting your hands dirty in the soil there.
Yeah, so hopefully that didn't make you too uncomfortable, Heathy. You still there and all right with us?
Yeah, I've shrunken beneath my car seat, but I'm still here, yeah.
So I know lots about you because we've shared water time for probably more than a decade now, and I was just interested to hear what sort of snippets Lauren had seen and heard of you over the years, and of course it's the really amazing work you've done for the Bight down there over the last couple of years that have really delivered your name to a lot of people around the world around looking after this coastline, this country and communities. And so I was really keen for us to have a recorded chat and not really dive into the Bight stuff because, as we all know, Equinor have pulled out and things have shifted there, and hopefully that industry has really come to its senses and we can move on a bit. And what I really wanted to dive into with you was the landscape where you live. Can you tell us a little bit about where you are in Australia?
Yeah. I'm on the west coast of the Eyre Peninsula, and just 20 k's sort of south of Streaky Bay, and yeah, it's a beautiful part of the country. It seems extremely unspoilt along the coastline. There's hardly any homes or signs of development, and pristine oceans full of life and fun surf, and then the landscape, it looks really barren, especially in the summer. After they've harvested their crops and the fields just go brown and dry right up, and it looks like a desert. But then in the winter it rains quite a bit and it all becomes green, and the patches of bush that are left are really beautiful. They're only low sort of lying mallee scrub and bigger gums to the south of us. But it's just those little patches are beautiful. And I imagine before 90% of the landscape has been cleared here for agriculture, that a lot of it would have been really lush, beautiful bushland.
Yeah. So that's sort of what I wanted to dive into, is the mallee bush there and some of the deforested stats we have in Australia, where we look at, the fact that 25% of our rainforests in Australia have been taken out, 45% of our open forests have been taken out. And then, it's something like 30% of the mallee forests have been also taken out in the last 200 years. And that when we look at that landscape down there where you are, it's kind of a shifting baseline sort of story where it's like, people of our generation and probably the generation before have been born into that landscape and thinking that that's just what it's naturally like. And so what I have for reference with that is that, I was born in New Zealand and I've always loved how beautiful and green that country is. But the reality of it is that it's been stripped and there's no forests, very little forests. There's just pasture land everywhere. And there's this illusion that it's this beautiful, green, 100% pure country. But in reality, it's just been incredibly deforested and it doesn't have that many people. So it looks really healthy and spacious and beautiful. And I can't help but feel that down there in South Oz where you are, it's a similar sort of story. You don't have the greenery of New Zealand, but you do have that feeling that when you're driving along and you see very few cars and very little development, what you do see is just this barren landscape. When you're there, do you feel that? Do you look around and go, man, there's these tiny pockets of mallee, but that's just this tiny, tiny amount of what once was there?
Oh, yeah, big time, especially driving or flying when you're covering vast distances. It's the vast majority is being cleared. Like, there'll be 1,000-acre paddocks with 5 or 6 trees in a row between them, spread out 100 meters apart or something ridiculous. But it's sort of locally where my property is, I'm really lucky to have quite a bit of bush around me and areas that the natural resource management have brought back and are revegetating. And that's really nice. But definitely you feel that too much has been cleared and degraded over time, over hundreds of years.
I'm just interested to know what defines mallee forest. What kind of ecosystem is it?
I guess the mallee scrub, it's just a low-lying gum, and it doesn't really have a main trunk. From the base of it, it just branches straight out into all its branches and canopy from the ground. So there's no major trunk, and they normally range between 1.5 and 8 or 9 meters in height. They don't get massive. It's a rich sort of habitat for kangaroos and wombats and emus and lots of different birds and probably thousands of other species as well. Yeah.
Is it something that is missing on the land that you're on?
Yeah, for sure. My property has a couple of patches of mallee on it, and it's great to have those. But since I've had it, the first year I was really lucky to get lined up with an organisation called the Chain of Bays, and they helped fund a lot of fencing and the over 135 kilometres worth of going up and down and seeding paddocks, which was a couple of 100 acres worth of paddocks that we've dropped native seed all throughout, and then provided me with some tube stock to get started that year, and that set a really good base just for things to start coming back. And since then I've fenced off another paddock and gone again with more re-veg, and as I save money and get more funding, I'll continue to revegetate the property. And in areas that stuff 5 years later is coming back really nice and quite thick, lots of acacias and some small mallees and melaleucas and native pines coming up which is amazing. And there's also vast areas where nothing's come up as well. It's not all glory, but there's been a few patches which have definitely succeeding, and it's awesome to see the bush coming back. This morning I woke up, and me and Ziggy often wake up before sunrise and get up and put a coffee on and make a bit of porridge and look out the eastern window of the house, and it looks straight back onto the hill of my property, which I'm focusing on revegetating. And now I can see a bit of a row of trees poking their head up above the ridge of the hill in the mornings on the sunrise. So just little things like that is so super rewarding for me, and it gets me charged up to keep on going and make that into a forest.
And so why is it rewarding? Like what is it about that feeling? Like you get a lot of stoke down there from surfing lovely waves and having open space and, catching your food and stuff like that. Like what's so good about that feeling of seeing some of those trees grow?
Well, it's the joy of, like you were saying, these paddocks that, on the surface, especially throughout the summer, they just look lifeless and completely bare. And full respect to all the farmers around here. I respect what they're doing, but a little bit of life comes up in the summer, and then they'll spray a herbicide on that to kill any life before the next crop goes in. So it's all about suppressing any life and then giving it the nutrients they need to grow their crop when they put it in. But it's just a bare hill that you can't really imagine trees or bushland coming back on, and to see it start coming back, especially when I want to live up on the hill one day and live amongst the trees and enjoy their shade and their kindling and all the other benefits, their clean air they're going to provide, and then pass it on to my children as well. That's I think I've been thinking about it, and it's probably the best thing I can really do in my lifetime is to grow as many trees as I can on my property, and that's probably going to be the best input I can give, really.
Yeah, that's a neat thing about this point in time where you obviously did a lot of work over the last year or so with the fight for the bite issue and going abroad and doing stuff elsewhere, but it was all linked to the bite and everything, but then really zooming back in on your feet in the ground there and basically localizing on the extreme level. Like literally you're talking about the space you inhabit and rehabbing that. So where does food come in? Like it's wonderful to regen these places that have been sort of dusted by industrial agriculture. What about your food? Like, is there any food systems as a part of what you're doing on that land?
Yeah, for sure. That's a massive part of it as well. And one of my biggest goals in life is to create a productive area in my garden that's it's loaded with fruit most of the year, if not year round, and providing abundant veggies and eggs from the chickens and ducks. And I would like to expand on that in time and grow on it. But I spend most days in the garden working in my veggie garden, or mulching and fertilizing fruit trees, or planting new trees, or building more structures to support the garden, or with the chickens or ducks. It's a huge priority, and it's only recently that I've been looking into more and more of the regenerative agriculture movement and the way that they're using a vast number of different species of animals to work in sequence with each other to all build up the soil and all work in harmony to enrich and build in that organic matter. And that's something I would like to experiment with more in the future. But at the moment, it's I've got my ducks that free range the orchard every day, and they keep on top of snails and fertilize everywhere with their droppings, and then I drain their pond once a week, and that's just a incredibly rich fertigation to spread over some lucky fruit trees. And I'm just getting a lot better at composting my chicken manure with the right amount of horse manure and the chicken bedding to get it all hot and break down nicely. I feel like I'm still in my sort of primitive stages of learning and growing the garden out here, but it's one of my major focuses and something I want to learn a lot more about and progress with into the future.
Heath, I'm interested to know, where did your passion for working the land come from? I know for Dave, he's also going through a bit of a rekindling of his love for our land and regenerating and using permacultural concepts to work plots of our space. And a lot of that comes from a period of about 6 or 8 months or maybe a year when he and his family lived on a farm in New Zealand. Did you have formative experiences like that that are drawing you back to working the land and living on the land with your family?
Yeah, definitely. I grew up on a 5-acre property just inland from Valor Beach, half an hour south of Coffs Harbour, and it's beautiful, subtropical, beautiful lush bush there. And we had a really productive orchard and veggie gardens as well. And it was all on a decent slope, and my mum did it all. She just loved it, and would spend every spare minute of the day she had out in the garden. Dad didn't get out there at all, really. He liked eating it, but he was just interested in shaping boards and going surfing and looking after us in other ways, building especially. But the garden was mum's deal, and she's always loved it. And some of my best memories growing up is getting up in the morning and going and picking guavas and grabbing some bananas off a hand of bananas that we picked a few days ago and grating them up into this mush and adding oats and peanuts, and that was our breakfast that we had for like 3 or 4 months of the year in guava season. And then going out and just picking buckets on buckets of persimmons and just gorging for weeks on end. They were, along with surfing, the best memories of my youth. So that's something I want my kids to be able to enjoy, and you want to give your kids, the best, healthiest food that you can, and yourself. And down here, it's pretty hard to find organic produce at all, let alone local. So you've sort of got to grow it your own, really. There's a few people getting into it, and they've sometimes got a little bit to spare, but you can't live on an organic diet from local produce. It's just not possible at the moment. You've got to grow it yourself. So, yeah.
And so that's the result of not so much isolation. I wouldn't say it's not the result of being a kind of semi-remote community. It's more the result of industrial agriculture dominating the space down there, isn't it?
Yeah, for sure. We've got a friend down the coast who inspired me on my property here to build a water catchment, a cheap way of just catching as much water as we can, but without getting into the catchment. He was just using this water to grow lots of veggies, and he had a good roadside stall, and he was selling them at the caravan park, and planning on putting in these almond and pistachio trees and getting a bigger orchard of that. And that inspired me to think, okay, it's not just there's a couple of little oasis areas on the Bight, like down at Bramfield, where there is great orchards already happening, but these areas that look a bit more lifeless, and they're not necessarily the oasis, but it's still possible to grow lots of amazing food. And yeah, that's right. That's just every paddock at the moment, broad scale farming.
Yeah. And what about Tim and Anna being an inspiration? That their garden for me down there is one of the most inspiring gardens I've ever seen, and especially in a space where you have, thousands and thousands of acres of sort of monocrop, and then you have this tiny little plot that they have, which is just busting out so much biodiversity and so many different types of food for them and their family of friends. Have they set a bit of a benchmark for you and others down there on that coast?
Well, their benchmark is astounding. It's they're just amazing. Their whole lifestyle is the most sustainable and eco-friendly I know of anyone living, and they also were a driving force of the Fight for the Bite campaign right from the get-go. But yeah, their garden is incredible. They've got such amazing variety of all the different fruits, and their vegetable garden's always just full to the brim. It's a little bit different to me because they've got incredible groundwater only a couple of meters below the soil, and they're in a lot richer, more red sort of bit of clay, so it holds the water a lot better than what I've got. So they've got a couple of other things sort of working on their side a bit more, but clay isn't always better than my sort of sandy base that I've got. But definitely a massive inspiration, but my challenges are a bit different to theirs.
Is there a network down there? Like, do you all sort of talk or meet up and trade sort of ideas, or even trade things? If someone's collected a bit of seaweed that's washed up from a storm, or just anything like that, is there any kind of growers network or just sort of friend network down there that helps this become a little bit more attainable?
There's definitely a friend network that are getting into it more and more. Like I've been trading, figs for herbs and whatever other seeds it is. But I've had an excess of figs and carob trees that I've been trading with other local gardeners, and there's a couple that are right into it. As far as getting advice and being able to call on someone for help, I always call Tim and Anna when I need to question something that's happening within the garden or with my flock of chickens or ducks, and they're always just got a wealth of knowledge that they're more than happy to share. And I see that this community of local and smaller scale organic growers is growing more and more, and I think it's going to become something even up at Streaky. Down at Port Lincoln, there's been roadside stalls that have popped up in the last few years, and I chatted with a lady who runs a great one there, and she just said that the stall's going amazing. She can't keep up. It's going off. People love to eat healthy food, and it's the same here. People want to eat good food, and they're really interested in turning their space into a productive space. And within my friend group, there's a lot of us that are getting right into it at different levels. But I think it's not really a major thing at the moment. There's no community markets or things like that to be meeting and swapping produce regularly. It's something that I think will become more regular. There is one at Christmas and one at Easter time that we have, and there we do see organic sort of local produce coming to that, but yeah, not often enough.
This is a really exciting area, I think, in terms of people growing food and sort of working with each other in our area. So Northern New South Wales, there's growers networks popping up that use apps on your phone to know what each other are growing, and perhaps that your space is really good for growing one type of food. Like you just said, you got carob and figs, and someone down the road might have a glut of grapes or something else going, and there's a way for us to know what each other has in surplus and how we can trade that. And so it's kind of an exciting time right now, given that we can do the farmers market thing. We can meet monthly or weekly or bi-monthly or whatever it is every Easter and Christmas, like you said. But actually, there are these new sort of ways for us to know about each other and to support each other with what we're growing. And I reckon that would be something that could really take off down there, considering, you might not want to drive all that way just to chance what might be at the market in Streaky or at Lincoln or something. And if you can actually speak with each other about what you're growing, then that sort of forges more relationships and a bit more of a community. Because the way I see it down there, I would way rather go to your garden or Tim and Anna's garden than stop at a servo and get, a soggy old veggie spring roll or something.
Yeah.
You might be different. You might love those soggy spring rolls at that servo, or stop at your place. I'd rather get a squazzer at your place, one of Joz's squazzes, which is a renowned food. Lauren's looking at me like, what the hell is a squazzer?
Squash?
Squash, she says. But, you know, like it's pretty just sort of common sense and logical to choose that homegrown sort of goodness there. So just to be clear, when you got on your property, what could you eat from that space?
Oh, you could eat the Lincoln weed if you're really desperate. It tastes pretty horrible.
Is that like a roadside sort of rocket or something?
Yeah, it is a little bit like rocket. But I don't really like rocket at the best of times, and this is like a really even more hectic, mustardy, peppery rocket. There's other bushes called nitroberry bushes that you can eat their berries in summer, which I have gorged myself on a few times. But yeah, that was it, I guess. The farmer was growing barley and rotating that with sheep. That's
Yep.
what the majority of the paddocks were used for, with those couple of small little areas of scrub fenced off.
And what's on the menu now from your space?
Well, the fruit trees are young, so we're not reaping the benefits of all of those just yet. However, our biggest fig had a great season this year. We were eating them every day for a few months. It was such a long harvesting season. I'm so excited about that. And, you know, I've put in another 12 this year, so we'll have 14 figs in the orchard and half a dozen stone fruit. We've got an orange, a lemon, a lime, and a mandarin, a couple of pomegranates. We've got 18 olives and a few mulberries, half a dozen grapes. Got lots of carobs, probably over 50 carobs that I've put in this year,
Wow.
which is really excited about the potential of carobs on my land. You know, they don't need a great amount of water. They are really drought hardy and they're prolific bearers and so useful for humans and livestock and you know, fire break, wind break. I read a quote in the Diggers Club magazine that said one carob tree can produce as much food as an acre of wheat, which I thought was pretty incredible.
Wow.
So
Wow.
yeah, putting in lots of carobs, and I'll keep on growing them. They've been so much fun propagating them from seed. It's been quite a process. That the fella I bought them off was just so open with his information, and you know, spent hours on the phone chatting with him. And you know, I had to scarify the edges of the seed on a bench grinder with holding the seed with needle nose pliers, and then soak them for a few days, and then drain them and give them a rinse once every day for a few days after that to get them to shoot, and then they just take off. Their tap roots, you know, 15 centimeters down within a couple of weeks, just on its way. So yeah, we've got all of that, and then we've got our chickens and ducks, which I've got 17 hens and 3 roosters and 1 drake duck and 7 girls ducks. And yeah, our veggie gardens, we've always got spinach and lettuce, and still got some basil in there and a few tomatoes at the moment, and lots of kale and lots of herbs. We've got a herb spiral that works great with our rosemary right up the top, you know, it's spiraling down through sage and oregano and thyme and lemon balm and all the way down to a couple of different mints at the bottom. And yeah, cucumbers are just finishing up. Got heaps of pumpkins. Got probably some other things. We've got blueberries, strawberries. Yeah, it's go on and on. Don't really realise how much it's got until you start talking about it.
That is an abundant market you have there. It sounds like a lot of time and care goes into the way you're working your land. Wouldn't you rather be in the ocean?
Nah, not really. Not at the moment. I've had such a blessed life. I've got to surf so much. Like I really binged hard on surfing for a couple of decades there, and I still love surfing so much. And I can't. You know, the highs I get from specific rides in the ocean, you know, they're unlike anything else in this world. But for me, on a daily basis, it's more important to keep on seeing me moving ahead on the property and moving towards that finished product that I've got in my mind of what I want this to be. And I still get a couple of surfs a week and get some really fun waves and get stoked. And then, I'm just happy to be on my farm and in the garden with the family.
Yeah, well, we can hear you loud and clear there on that one. I think the last couple of weeks for us has been a dream scenario of, seeing a swell and a storm sort of coming, perhaps 5 or 6 days out, and knowing that we're going to get really surf heavy, especially because both of us are real surf rats, and our little guy Minnow loves the water too now. But getting into the garden, getting into the beds, and getting things sort of ready for a week or so of neglect because a swell is coming, and then that swell's finished now, and we've got perhaps a week between this moment and the next swell. So back into the gardens and the orchards we go. Is that a kind of dance that you just love too? Because we're both of a similar age, and I can just hear loud and clear how enriching and how satisfying the whole garden experience is. But don't you just think they fit together so well, surfing and gardening? Like they're really complementary.
They can be, for sure. Yeah.
Oh, okay. Interesting. Do you not feel that?
I'm not sure. I feel like if I didn't surf, I would have learnt heaps more about gardening probably 10 years ago and been a bit further ahead of where I am. I do feel like surfing gives you, a really special connection with nature that is hard to find elsewhere. To be able to just step into completely natural realm and find such joy and be scared absolutely shitless and to feel all these emotions that you rarely sort of get on land, and to understand the power of nature and the beauty of it is something that probably carries into working with the land. I haven't really thought about it that much before, to be honest, but that works with it. And also, if you take a bag in your backpack, you can grab a bit of seaweed, and that can work too. Get a bit of both, get a surf and some seaweed.
Does the idea of progress, I mean, I guess you sort of spoke to it earlier, but with surfing, kind of one of the most beautiful things about surfing is you align with this pulse of energy, you ride, to the sand if you're lucky, and you've got nothing to show for it. You paddle out and you do it again and again and again and again. And we're all committed to probably doing that and indulging or overindulging on that sensation for the rest of our lives. But with gardening, with you're building a relationship with the land, you get to be part of a system where you can see progress.
Yeah, and surfing, it's amazing, but it feels like a bit of a selfish act at times. Like, we're not, you could spend your whole life surfing, but you're not really giving back a great deal potentially in other areas that you could be. When you're gardening, you feel like you're achieving something that's really worthy, whether it's providing food for the family or seeing a paddock return to bush, whatever it is, or just planting one tree or one herb. That's something that's going to grow. It's going to provide you with food or shelter or whatever it is. But it's really satisfying and tangible thing that is rewarding, for a long time.
That's so cool, because I often really love and celebrate the fact that surfing doesn't produce anything, like it's just this thing it's just a feeling that we feel and that we create from the experience. But then in the same moment, it is actually really nice, like you're saying, to do work on the land, with the land, in conversation with the land, that is something you can show another person, you can give to another person, you can support your family or others with. And I guess for me, that's actually that feeling of the two being really complementary for each other that I was trying to get to before, but I didn't really realize until you were just saying that. And that's a nice balance. It's nice to go and do something totally superfluous and purposeless like surfing after working in an ecological space like on your land. So it's cool just to hear that you're doing that in another ecosystem than what we have here. You know, it's a totally different landscape down there. What's the future hold? Have you got any, you know, really big plans, or are you just sort of growing from one stage to the next with this work?
Yeah, I've got a big wave pool on the go. Just getting the plans drawn up and going to get that
Nice.
happening in the dam here. And every bit of water I catch, I'm just going to put in that. And
that's perfect.
Oh,
you're so in line with the rest of the surfing world. That's amazing.
No. Yeah, it's just to keep moving in the direction that I am. But I feel like I've thrown myself right into the deep end in a way since I've bought my property, with not much experience or education in gardening or building or land management. And I've had a hands-on education in my 5 years of owning the property, but I'd actually like to do some study now as well, and you know, hopefully get Addie Jones down here to have a look, and some other people just that might, you know, see something in the landscape that I haven't. I'd love to incorporate swales into my hill and to dam up all the runoff from my driveways and be able to use that for irrigation. You know, I'd love to be producing bulk, biologically rich liquid fertilizer that I'm spraying out on my paddocks, and, you know, growing beautiful feed to graze animals through. There's lots of things I'd love to do, but it's a long process, and it's all time and money to get there. But I'm chipping away bit by bit, and yeah, it's all time and money and water for me. So water's one of my biggest challenges, and like I said with earlier mentioned, my water catchment, that's been a real game changer. You know, being able to just build this sort of massive roof out of old tin and old fence posts, so for really cheap, getting a huge amount of catchment area to feed, you know, to catch around 100,000 litres a year, and that'll irrigate my fruit trees I've got now. But, you know, for wanting to grow into bigger and better things, well, I'll have to get creative in how I'll capture that water and use it wisely.
This episode of Watershed Chats is presented by Patagonia, whose purpose-driven mission is to use business to protect our home planet. Thanks to our sound engineer and musician Shannon Sol Carroll and artist-in-residence Chris Miyashiro. On behalf of myself, Lauren Hill, and my co-host Dave Rastovich, thanks for listening with us. Learn more at waterpeoplepodcast.com.